Barry, who disguised himself as a messenger officer and escaped, is still wearing the uniform of the Great Britain Army, but even before the Prussian army appears on screen, the melody of their military song, Hohenfriedberg March, rings out loudly. That Barry does not consider himself a member of a nation-state is paradoxically expressed in the scene where he drinks with Captain Potzdorff, who distrusts him. As the captain's men sing the Hohenfriedberg March, the two raise their tumblers and say, "To our two great nations." Potzdorff is trying to figure out if the other person is a fake, but it's clear that Barry doesn't mean what he says. The marching songs and military songs used in this film are treated as if they symbolize the inhumanity of the military, which operates under the flag of a nation-state. It is mentioned in the narration in the first half of the film, but it is also shown in the second half that the negative effects of military life continue after the war ends. Immediately after a beautiful shot accompanied by a voiceover that tells of Barry having a son with Lady Lyndon, follows a shot of Barry reveling with the prostitutes, with officers holding up drinking cups and singing British Grenadiers. If Irish folk songs, military songs, and marches serve the function of evoking the historical background of the story and encouraging the audience to read it intellectually, variously arranged pieces of Handel, Sarabande, from Harpsichord Suite No. 4, of Schubert, the second movement of Piano Trio No. 2, and of Vivaldi, third movement of Cello Concerto No. 5, in contrast, serve the function of inducing audiences' sympathy. Hello, everyone. This video is a part of series Understanding Auteur Films, based on 3-volume books of the same title. In this video we'll talk about Barry Lyndon, by Stanley Kubrick. Except for a brief introduction of the film, the video has the following sections. Position of narrator. Extensive use of zooming. Multifunctional music. Empty shot and recurring motifs. Capitalism, nation-state, individualism. Now, let's begin. Barry Lyndon, 75. Stanley Kubrick's Barry Lyndon is one of the lesser-known works in his career. Barry Lyndon may not be as popular as 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968, which brought groundbreaking visual reality to science fiction genre, Eyes Wide Shut, 1999, the director's posthumous work, or The Shining, 1980, highlighting Jack Nicholson's mysterious performance. However, I consider Barry Lyndon to be Kubrick's creative pinnacle in terms of artistic accomplishment. When you watch this film, I think it's best for you to forget Kubrick's name and his works that have become somewhat of a legend. This is because Barry Lyndon is not only based on its own unique compositional principles, but also because it is an exceptionally emotional work for Kubrick's films. Moreover, the themes are deeply explored. Position of narrator.
Barry's father.
In Barry Lyndon, there is a so-called third-person narrator, extradiegetic narrator. In other words, the narrator is omniscient about the events that occur in the story world, remaining anonymous until the end. The narrator is a British actor named Michael Hordern, born in 1911, namely, he was 64 years old at the time of the film's release, 17 years older than the director. Hordern's calm, warm, and yet somehow melancholy voice softens the satire contained in the narration text, while also matches the musical selection that is more lyrical than comical and the picturesquely beautiful image. Because they harmonize so well, the audience may unconsciously identify the narrator with the author of the film. The image of the narrator, created by the narration of Barry Lyndon along with the images and music is so powerful. The narration text is heavily satirical in the first half of the film, and it is proper for the contrast between the main character Barry's anti-hero nature and the story's content, more typical of adventure novels or picaresque novels. Redmond Barry, a fallen Irish aristocrat, has a certain amount of courage, but is not heroic and is an opportunist. He continues his wanderings in Europe, teaming up with fellow gambler and con man Chevalier. Barry doesn't have any beliefs, he just aims to live a rich and secure life as an aristocrat while being influenced by circumstances. Ryan O'Neal, who plays such a character, is neither particularly handsome nor fearless. The narrator does not particularly emphasize the satire of Barry's adventure stories, nor does he speak in a monotone manner, but speaks with a level of intonation that makes the audience feel funny when they notice the satire in the text. Later in the film, the narration text itself takes on a slightly different tone. It informs the audience of Barry's lonely and miserable end in advance of the story's development and conclusion and begins to talk matter-of-factly about the loneliness of Lady Lyndon, whom he marries for his fortune, Barry's fatherly love for their son Brian, the sadness that Brian's death brings to both. Hordern's narration, which has the characteristics already mentioned, begins to sound like his attitude toward the protagonists has changed as the text becomes less satirical and he begins to relate their fates. This is also influenced by the interaction with Vivaldi's E minor cello concerto, third movement, inserted many times in the second half, and by the lyrical empty shots. I'll talk more about characteristics of empty shots and the versatility of music in this film later. The technique of voiceover narration, which had become moldy towards the end of the 1950s, was completely outdated by the 1970s, except for the use of characters in the works. Although the narrators' positions are completely different, it can be said that Barry Lyndon and Tarkovsky's The Mirror, created around the same time, revolutionized the technique of voiceover narration. Extensive use of zooming. One thing that is often mentioned concerning the shooting of this film is that a special lens was used to shoot the night interior scenes lightened only by candlelight. However, from a point of view of visual style, there is a more important feature. The visuals for Barry Lyndon follow the standard style of an orthodox feature film, except for the extensive use of zooming. The scene of fights and brawls shot with handheld cameras is not deviated from that style. Zooming is not a technique often used in auteur films. From the late 1960s to the 1970s, genre films often used rapid zooming, and even Akira Kurosawa, who disliked this technique, used zooming out in Dudeskadén, 1970, but after that he didn't use it. Particularly notable about the zooming in Barry Lyndon is the gradual zoom out, often used in the opening shot of each episode. This zoom out usually results in a gradual transition from a portion of the character or group, close shot or middle shot, to the whole image, full shot, and then to a distant view that includes the surrounding environment, long shot. A picturesque composition is completed the moment when the camera fixes it as a long shot. Zoom in is also used sometimes, giving the subjective views of the protagonists, Barry and Lady Lyndon, a sense of focus on what they are looking at. This rather belongs to the standard style of feature films from the 1960s onwards. The systematical use of gradual zoom out in Barry Lyndon gives a certain pattern to the rhythm of the film, and also serves as a bridge between the drama part, which consists of classically edited scenes, and the narration provided by the narrator's voiceover. During the zooming out, as in the case of novels when describing the scenes and characters, the narrative by the image is suspended, and instead the voice of the narrator took over the function of narrative. When the zoom is finished and the screen is fixed as a long shot, the image once again becomes the storyteller. What makes this transition feel less abrupt is that various music, including a military march, is often superimposed on one zooming out shot and continues into the next shot. Multifunctional music. It is now clear that music in feature films is more than just accompaniment for dramas. But in the past it was only given that role in films other than those where music was the theme. Especially in the classical Hollywood cinema from the late 1930s to the early 1950s, which was considered so by many critics and movie fans from the 1980s to the 1990s, the function of music was very limited. The film music that time leaves little impression when listened to separately from the story unfolding on screen, being so characterless to the extent that only the title theme music is memorable. Since the 1950s, filmmakers around the world have been reconsidering the function of music in films. In Rashomon, 1950, Akira Kurosawa had Fumio Hayasaka compose music that has nothing in common with traditional Japanese music or Hollywood film music, and which closely resembles Ravel's Bolero. In Kurosawa's opinion, this piece expresses the labyrinth and complexity of human psychology depicted in the film. In the film A Man Escaped, 1956, Robert Bresson used only the first song from Mozart's Mass in C minor, that evokes a distinctly Christian theme along with the film's title. Original title was A Man Condemned to Death Has Escaped or The Wind Blows Where It Wants. The subtitle is a quotation from the Gospel of John. In this way, classical music has a depth of cultural associations that music composed for film does not have. It may be due to the form of the piece, or it may be related to the demands of the era in which it was composed, or the themes chosen by the composers themselves. But in any case, the feature is impossible for later composers to reproduce without imitating it. Barry Lyndon was produced 20 years after Kurosawa, Bresson, and others overturned the convention of film music. It's no wonder, then, that the music in this film is more multifunctional than that in classic Hollywood cinema. In Barry Lyndon, classical music is constantly heard, so much so that it feels like there are very few scenes where music cannot be heard. Of the 19 pieces included in the soundtrack, apart from 2 by Schubert, the second movement of Piano Trio No. 2, and 5 German Dances No. 1, only musical pieces known at the time in Europe of the late 18th century, where the story develops, are used. Although some of the musical instruments have changed drastically due to the arrangement, the selection of music gives the impression that it is aiming to perfectly recreate the story world of the film as if it were a historical document. Such a historical research-like commitment seems strange, taking in mind the fact that classical music in feature films of the 1970s, including Kubrick's previous work A Clockwork Orange, was used almost unrelated to their historical setting of the story worlds, Bach in Tarkovsky's Solaris 72, and Norman Jason's Rollerball 75, Beethoven in Richard Fleischer's Soylent Green 73, and John Boorman's Zardoz 74, etc. In the first place, it was Kubrick himself who started using classical music in feature films, unrelated to the historical setting or theme of the story world. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, what does a rotating space station have to do with a Viennese waltz? Despite the seemingly pedantic emphasis on historical research, the music in Barry Lyndon is actually quite versatile. Some of them, the Irish folk song, The Irish Woman, composed by Peadar O'Donovan, 1700–69, the marches of Great Britain and Prussia, remind the historical background, the birth of nation-states in modern times, that may be overlooked by an audience focusing on the protagonist's journey and adventures and the picturesque beauty of the images. This historical background is often mentioned not only in the narration and characters' lines, but also in the images. Specifically, they are the feud between the Kingdom of Great Britain and the Kingdom of France, the 7 Years' War that led Barry to leave Ireland for Europe, the War for Independence of America mentioned in his audience with King George III after his marriage with Lady Lyndon, and the year 1789, the year of the French Revolution, seen on the document she signs in the final episode in response to the pension claim from Barry, who has retired to Ireland. In Europe in the latter half of the 18th century, Enlightenment ideas, which contributed to bourgeois revolutions, spread throughout Europe, and capitalist economies were rapidly developing. Religious authority declined, and the ruling class tried to unite the people with the idea of the nation instead of religion, and to distract people from the inequalities that were far from the ideals of the Enlightenment. However, in this film Barry acts according to personal feelings rather than national ideals. This can be seen from the fact that he immediately considered leaving the army of Great Britain after his close friend Captain Grogan was killed in the battlefield, and eventually seized the opportunity to do so. Barry's rapid change is emphasized by the music. In the scene in which Captain Grogan is fatally shot by enemy troops, the infantry of the Great Britain Army marches while playing British Grenadiers on drums and flutes, and falls one after another under gunfire. Barry, who disguised himself as a messenger officer and escaped, is still wearing the uniform of the Great Britain Army, but even before the Prussian army appears on screen, the melody of their military song, Hohenfriedberg March, rings out loudly. That Barry does not consider himself a member of a nation-state is paradoxically expressed in the scene where he drinks with Captain Potzdorff, who distrusts him. As the captain's men sing the Hohenfriedberg March, the two raise their tumblers and say, "To our two great nations." Potzdorff is trying to figure out if the other person is a fake, but it's clear that Barry doesn't mean what he says. The marching songs and military songs used in this film are treated as if they symbolize the inhumanity of the military, which operates under the flag of a nation-state. It is mentioned in the narration in the first half of the film, but it is also shown in the second half that the negative effects of military life continue after the war ends. Immediately after a beautiful shot accompanied by a voiceover that tells of Barry having a son with Lady Lyndon, follows a shot of Barry reveling with the prostitutes, with officers holding up drinking cups and singing British Grenadiers. If Irish folk songs, military songs, and marches serve the function of evoking the historical background of the story and encouraging the audience to read it intellectually, variously arranged pieces of Handel, Sarabande, from Harpsichord Suite No. 4, of Schubert, the second movement of Piano Trio No. 2, and of Vivaldi, third movement of Cello Concerto No. 5, in contrast, serve the function of inducing audiences' sympathy. This effect is typically seen in the episode of Brian's death which I referred to earlier while talking about the position of the narrator. In addition to reminding the audience of historical context, inviting them to the intellectual reading of the work together with the narration, inducing sympathy for the characters difficult to sympathize, music also serves another function. It is the aesthetic function inherent to the art of music. Together with the images, it creates a melancholic atmosphere that can be described as a sense of the world full of resignation, yet finding a glimmer of hope in the beauty of art. Particularly in the second half, the effect becomes noticeable when it is laid on picturesque shots including zoom-outs with characters at the center and the story is paused, and empty shots, landscape shots or indoor shots with no people or nearly no people. Melody and rhythm, the components of musical beauty that cannot be put into words, have a strong influence on the audience's interpretation of the story and characters. Empty shot and recurring motifs. The analysis so far shows that despite the linear plot and the simplicity of the story, Barry Lyndon is filled with rich meanings and emotion through the complex interrelations between the film's components. To conclude my analysis of the film's components and their interrelations, I would like to offer my personal opinion on the role of empty shots and recurring motifs in this film. The empty shot is usually a shot of a location within the story world of a feature film, without the main characters, and often without any human beings. The reasons for its insertion vary from work to work, and even within the same work, depending on the structure of the scene or episode. However, one thing that is certain is that empty shots temporarily pause the development of the story and give the audience an opportunity for introspection. In Barry Lyndon, the distinction between empty shots and long shots is not always clear. This is also related to the presence of recurring motifs. The film has a visual motif of a horse-drawn carriage coming down a single road, and it appears before and after Barry's fortunes change throughout the film. Horse-drawn carriages were the most common means of transportation at the time, so it can be considered that this shot was necessary for the development of the story. However, if this is the case, it would be easier for the audience to understand if the carriage the main characters are riding in is filmed in full shots so that they can be seen through the window, and then joint them to long shots. However, in the parts where the single road and horse-drawn carriage appear, which I consider to be a recurring motif, the editing is done in other ways. This is a part of the video released at patreon.com. To watch a full version of this video, please visit patreon.com and join the membership of the authors page. You can watch exclusive 3 new video about world cinema every month, plus some more videos, i.e. recordings of authors' public lectures etc., only for $2 a month. Your support is very important for our work.